10 minutes later, here he comes in his Jeep, comes down the line, pulls up to my platoon, jumps out of his Jeep. I'm 5'10". He was like 6'4", so he's a big guy. He jumps out of this Jeep, and I mean, I'm standing at attention, and he is steadily just ripping my ass. I mean, I felt like the dumbest you-know-what on the planet. And he was a world-class ass chewer. I mean, he was really good at it.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun about all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today's episode is brought to you by Exec HQ, a C-suite fractional firm providing elite executives for your business. Today, Jeff is interviewing Robert Abe Abrams. General Abrams is a retired four-star general in the U.S. Army. He served in both times of war and peace in a variety of positions, most recently as commander of the Combined Forces Command in South Korea. He is currently a board director for Vistage International, a board director for the Bob Woodruff Foundation, a senior board advisor for Via Space, a member of the Board of Business Executives for Gridiron Capital, and a vice chairman of the Korea Defense Veterans Association, as well as a public speaker and a military contributor for ABC News. Let's listen as Jeff talks to General Abrams.
Abe, welcome to the Corporate Couch today.
Jeff, thanks for having me.
Very excited. I'm honored to have someone that served 39 years in the United States Army, four-star general. Thank you so much for your service. I've done 90 episodes to date that have been published, and I've had Baron Lucas, retired Marine colonel. I know Army and Marines are kind of like cats and dogs, but he had almost a 30-year career at the Marines. He ran a 1,500 pilots fighter squadron, and Sly James, a former mayor of Kansas City, was a badass Marine. He was military police. Dave Komar, who you know, has been on the podcast. Tony Hoffman, just honored and blessed to have your service to protect our freedom. So thanks for coming on today.
You bet. Thanks for having me. You know, anytime I get an opportunity to talk about leadership and sort of share some lessons from my life, I jump at the opportunity to do it. One thing for veterans, especially longtime veterans, that makes us all a little uncomfortable and awkward is when the American public thanks us for our service, because we don't really know what to say in response. But here's where I've settled on. So when you say thank me for my service, I say, hey, Jeff, you were worth it. You and every other American, you were worth it, because I believe in our country. I believe in our way of life. I believe in our Constitution, and I believe in protecting it. And one of the best ways to protect us and to protect the American people is to serve in the armed forces. And so it was a privilege for me to be able to serve that long. And but you were worth it. So was every other American. So thank you.
Like I said, just honored to have you on. Well, let's start with a fun question. Even though that people that know you fairly well, what would surprise them about you?
First off, I'd say I'm a raging introvert, and I recognized it at a young age and I had to work really hard to engage, connect, chat people up. The more senior I got, the more requirements I had to open up and talk with, a variety of people. And I've taken the Myers-Briggs personality test multiple times. I'm a very strong ISTJ. A lot of people, when I tell them that, they go, "Oh, no, that's not true." And I go, "Oh, yeah, 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 absolutely." So if I've had a long day of having to interact with people, like every other introvert, yeah, I just want quiet time. I have to decompress. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want any stimulus. I just want to vegetate because I'm exhausted. I think people would be surprised to hear that.
Yeah, interesting. So I've been Myers-Briggs many times, and my co-host, business partner Joe Deshawn, also. So Joe is an ISTJ, and I'm an ESTJ. So we share some similarities in terms of, I think we share the same birth year. I know your dad was a famous Army commander, and so you probably moved a lot. And I think you were born in Germany. Is that correct? When he was stationed there, or I thought I saw on your
Yeah.
Wikipedia page you were born in Germany.
Yeah, that's right. I was born in Germany. My first 5 years of my life, four of them were in Germany. Then a couple of years in DC, and then I lived in Thailand for 5 years.
Wow.
I'm the youngest of six kids. As you said, my dad was a soldier. Both my older brothers were soldiers. My three sisters, all married Army officers, soldiers. My wife's the daughter of a soldier. Her brother is a retired soldier. So it's a little bit of the family business.
Abe, I see a pattern here. I have to ask you, where does German food rank in your preferences of food, ethnic foods? Just curious.
Yeah, it's high up on the list. I'm a bit snobbish about it. I'm actually pretty spoiled. So my mother-in-law, my wife's mom, was German, and she was an excellent, excellent cook. And and of course, she passed all those recipes and skills and talent down to my wife. I'm pretty picky as to what's high quality German. If she's cooking, it's getting prepared as high quality German fare.
Right.
German restaurants in the United States kind of hit or miss, right?
Yeah.
So you got to go back to Germany if you want to get, true, authentic German food.
Yeah, I
But
always
it's high
wondered
up there.
about
But
that.
I've spent a long time in Asia, so I've got a pretty strong liking for Asian food, all kinds.
Great. I know you're in the Kansas City metro area, up in the Northland, Liberty area. Any preferences on Asian food restaurants in Kansas City?
We love this area. We truly do. I mean, it's an amazing place. What is disappointing is we have yet to find one decent Korean restaurant.
Yeah.
It's and that actually hurts because my last 3+ years in the Army was in Korea with my wife and I, and we fell in love with Korean food and can't get it here locally. So when I travel on business, if I'm going somewhere, that's the first thing I'm looking for. If I've got a night to myself, is I'm going to go find a Korean food restaurant.
There you go. Love it. Love it. So, having moved that much and, spending time in Germany, Thailand, growing up, what was fun for you growing up in that type of environment? What did you love doing?
What was fun was I got to experience at a very young age a lot of different cultures because my dad was gone a lot. He was, when we were in Thailand for 5 years, he was in Vietnam 5 consecutive years, which is relatively unheard of. We saw him occasionally, a weekend here or there over the 5 year period. So my mom was obviously highly influential in my upbringing. What was fun was learning all these different cultures, languages, their food, their customs, courtesies, etc. I sort of grew up with a true appreciation for other people's cultures and traditions and so forth. I played soccer when I was a kid. Growing up overseas, this was obviously long before the internet. This was long before satellite TV. That's what we did for fun. We played soccer. And I played all over Thailand. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, interesting. Like I said, we're born, you and I born in the same year. Like soccer just became a high school sport. I grew up about an hour from New York City, close to West Point on the other side of the Hudson River. And soccer became a sport my freshman year in high school. But obviously, you grew up in the the real football, because that would be unheard of that that young age somebody in the States would play soccer. Honestly, right?
5 years. I went to an international school in Thailand. 36 nations represented
Wow.
at the International School of Bangkok. There was no majority type citizen country across the international school. All the embassy kids. There was a lot of industry in Thailand in the 60s and early 70s that the executives brought their families and had their kids going to the international school. My best friend there was one American family that lived within about a mile of where we lived out in the country. But the rest of my peer group, my friends, were all foreigners. I had a set of Danish twins. There was a Swede. There was a couple of Germans. Those are the kids I grew up with.
Right. Wow. Incredible. So, I always ask guests, what was their aspiration as a kid? What did they want to be when they grew up? What was your path always at a young age? Like, I am going to be like my dad and serve in the military? What was it for you then?
I'm really glad you asked. I get that question frequently because a lot of people assume that it was some sort of foregone conclusion. First off, my father passed away the third day of my freshman year in high school, after a short fight with cancer. Obviously, aside from the trauma of losing your father at a relatively young age, both my brothers were not in the area. My dad certainly had plenty of friends that could have helped been, quote, fatherly figures. But to be honest with you, most people did not want to impose themselves. They didn't want to presume anything. And neither of my brothers wanted to provide, they felt completely out of place giving any sort of guidance. So I was left to my own devices. That is the God's honest truth. There was zero pressure. There was zero influence. There was zero anything. Well, how did this happen then? This is an interesting story. So between my sophomore and junior year in high school, one of my brothers was stationed in Germany. So my mom had plenty, friends in Germany from many years and tours there. And so she's like, hey, we're going to go to Germany for vacation this year. We're gonna base out of your brother's home in Gelnhausen, and we'll spend some time with them. But then, we're gonna travel down to Austria and visit this family, and we're gonna travel to Bavaria and visit this family, and I'm gonna see all my friends. It was just me and my mom. The next oldest sibling was in college. She wasn't palling around for this trip. My other sister was in medical school. Everybody else was gone. I'm with my mom. And I had been given this some thought about what I might do. When I get over there and we show up, my brother he's got some quiet time with me. He says, hey, what are you thinking about doing out of high school? This is the younger of the two brothers. And so he's 14 years older than I am, by the way.
Oh, wow.
When he was in high school, unfortunately, he had to spend a lot of time babysitting me when I was a 1, 2, and 3-year-old. So I said, hey, I don't know. Maybe I think I'm thinking about I might go in the service. I might come in the Army. And boy, he bristled at that because my middle brother, to be honest with you, he always thought I was soft. I didn't have that in me. So he kind of grumped around, came back the next day and said, all right, hey, if you're serious about this, when mom goes down to visit so-and-so, she's going to be down there and then she'll come back. But I tell you what, I'm going to put you to work in a tank platoon for 2 weeks. You're going to work for this lieutenant and this platoon sergeant. You're going to get exposed. And then at the end of that 2 weeks, if you think you're still interested, you let me know. And he was certain that after the first day, they would break me. So to make a long story short, I was exhausted every day. I got up at the crack of dawn. I worked my butt off all day long in a motor pool, helping fix tanks, carrying this. I was the step and fetch it kid. Those guys put me to work. I dragged myself home at the end of the day, eat my dinner, take a shower, and go straight to bed. At the end of the 2 weeks, there was a couple of things that I knew in my heart. One was I actually really loved being a soldier. It was awesome. I saw incredible teamwork. I saw working for a common good, getting stuff done. There was a certain edge of seriousness. This was a forward, stationed in Germany, West Germany during the Cold War. They had a sense of urgency about the importance of their mission, deterring the Soviet Union. and it was felt at every level. I think I found what I like to do. The second thing I knew was I said, and even at my young age, I knew that we were doing things harder, not smarter, harder and longer, not smarter. And I said, if I'm going to do this, I need to be an officer. I need to be in a place where I can make decisions because we do some stupid stuff. So I told my brother, and he's like, okay. And I got good reports from everybody. So that set me on a path to apply to West Point. I got accepted, and the rest is history.
My dad had early onset Alzheimer's. He was a union welder, and so he started having symptoms when I was about 10. And then he was in a VA hospital because my stepmom could not take care of him anymore. What was it like to lose your dad at such a young age? I know he was looked like he was kind of older when they had you. You said there was a 14-year difference between you and your next middle brother. And it sounds like your mother was phenomenal in terms of being a strong role model for you. But what was it like? One, your dad's famous, right? I mean, he was I think 4-star also. They name a tank after him, an M1 Abrams tank, I guess. And Patton said your dad was his only peer as a tank commander. So I mean, to have that kind of pedigree, was it pressure on you? And talk about the loss at 14 and how it impacted you.
He was 45 when I was born, so I came late in the long line. Not only was he a 4-star, he was the number one guy in the Army. He was the chief of staff of the Army, and he's the only one who died on active duty. He died while in office. And truthfully, he soldiered to within about, I'd say, 2 weeks of the end when he had to go back into the hospital. Jeff, to be honest with you, it was crushing. It was crushing. Up to that point, I had a certain amount of certainty in my life. We knew what Dad was doing. I knew what my brothers were doing. I knew where I was going to be. We had a plan, where I was going to high school because my father had another 2 years in the Army before he retired. So we had a plan, but he was always going to be part of it. And there was a whole litany of things that he wanted to do in retirement that he and I could have done together. He liked to fish. I like to fish. So did my mom. He liked to hunt. I like to hunt. He's the one that exposed me to it. He loved dogs. I love dogs. In fact, he had just gotten a new hunting dog, a black lab. It was pretty devastating. I knew what would happen. We'd move out to our family's house in Falls Church. And like I said earlier, there was sort of an absence of any other familial sort of guidance or anything else. So it's just me and my mom. And she was an incredibly strong woman, oldest of 5 girls, right? They all went to Vassar College in New York.
Oh, yeah.
And
Poughkeepsie, yeah.
Yeah. And that's how she and my dad met. She was no BS, a great leader in her own right, force of personality, and an incredible role model for all of us. So I'm grateful that I had her in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you make the decision, go to West Point. Obviously, you have to get sponsored and nominated to go. Yeah. I don't even know where to start. I mean, you had active, combat troops in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Afghanistan, Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield, Iraq, Operation Iraqi Freedom, etc. I mean, just kind of maybe walk us through kind of your progression. And I know you served in Germany on both the East-West borders when the Berlin Wall was there. I mean, just walk through that and kind of talk about, kind of your progression and, because I'd love to hear the whole story. I mean, because obviously I didn't do the research on how many, what's the probability of making it to a 4-star general, but it's got to be pretty slim, right? And, I know when you were in Fort Bragg, you ran U.S. Armed Forces Command, 776,000 soldiers, 96,000 civilians. So you're running a company of, almost 1 million employees, let's say. So anyhow, let's kind of pick out some career highlights and kind of walk through it from your early stage after West Point graduation in 82.
Yeah, sure. So, I graduated and like all newly commissioned officers, I I had some military schooling, right off the gate. I went to the infantry mortar platoons course because my first duty assignment was going to be in that cavalry squadron with a mission up on the East-West German border in the 3rd Armored Division's cavalry squadron. I went to a specifically tracked for cavalry units basic course. Back then it was 19 weeks, and graduated. Then I went to U.S. Army Ranger School down at Fort Benning, and graduated from that. And then 3 weeks later, got on an airplane and flew to Germany. Arrived in my first duty assignment. As it would be, like most first duty assignments, they're very formative. And that's why I use that term specifically, because for a couple of reasons. One, the mission, when we think about the old Cold War, we had cavalry units at the forefront of the forces that would deploy along the interzonal border between East and West Germany and conduct a covering force mission, which was basically to fight a delay, attrit Soviet attacking forces to buy time for the rest of the U.S. Army Europe at that time divisions and the follow-on divisions coming from the States to get to the fight. That's what a covering force does. It's buying time and space. So a lot of independent operations, big sector. From the day I got there, it was, I knew from my high school time with my brother's unit, I knew there was going to be a sense of urgency. They had a real sense of urgency and purpose. So much so that I think my 3rd day there, before I had a chance to go draw my gear and everything else, I didn't even have a car yet. I'm living at an off-post apartment. They didn't know when it was going to happen, but a big external evaluation of our alert procedures. So they were practicing internal. So the squadron commander called an alert. So the way it worked back then, before cell phones, you had a phone roster. So I was in a tree. I got a call from the charge of quarters. They gave the code word. Okay, I had to call somebody, then throw on my uniform and get into the unit area. I had to rely on my neighbor to take me in. It was a lieutenant that lived across the street.
Wow.
So then I stumble in. So the task was, you got to get all the weapons out of the arms room. You got to get all the nuclear, biological, chemical equipment out of that room. Everybody gets to the motor pool, prepare the vehicles for operation, crank the vehicles, make sure the radios work, the vehicles are working, load bags. And back then, all our vehicles were uploaded with ammunition in the motor pool, which is unheard of today. But that's how serious it was. And all our machine gun ammo was in a big green box, a mill van next to our motor pool line. So we had to offload, take all that out of the green box, put it up on all the tanks, strap it down, and get ready to move. And the standard was, from the time it gets called, you had to be ready to move, packed, loaded, everything ready to go in 2 hours.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible.
That was my 3rd morning. I didn't even know how to get to the motor pool.
Oh, jeez.
So you get the picture, right? And there was a real sense of purpose.
Sure, yeah.
Now, this is one story I like to tell, because I'm a believer that the human beings generally learn one of 2 ways. One is through repetition, solid repetition, practicing the behavior that you want, right? Repetition. They learn that way. The other way to learn is through significant emotional event, typically something bad. In my career, I had plenty of both. My first significant emotional event was on day 4. So day 3, I got an alibi. I didn't know anything. I was in by 3 o'clock in the morning. We worked all day. I didn't get home till 8 o'clock at night. The very next day, we had another alert.
Oh, jeez.
This time, I'm expected to not make all the same mistakes I made the day before. So I now know my way around. And for my troop commander, my captain, communication was critically important. And when he called on the radio, you had to answer on the first try. No second calls. Okay. So I knew that. So we get down the motor pool, make a communications check. Good. And I tell my driver, hey, listen to the radio. If the troop commander calls, answer him. I need to go check the vehicles. I need to go check on preparations. Sir, I got it. So about 20 minutes later, the troop executive officer, or the first lieutenant, comes running down the line at me. He's coming at me. And I'm like, me? Get on the radio. I am on the radio. No, you're not. So I go to my vehicle, and my driver was sound asleep.
Oh, jeez.
And I can hear the troop commander on the speaker over the din of the running armored personnel carrier. I can hear my troop commander calling me. Oh, my God. So I answer. he just blisters me publicly, right, on the radio so everybody can hear it. And they all knew it was coming. And then, if that was not enough, 10 minutes later, here he comes in his Jeep, comes down the line, pulls up to my platoon, jumps out of his Jeep. And I'm 5'10". He was like 6'4", so he's a big guy. He jumps out of this Jeep, and I mean, I'm standing at attention, and he is steadily just ripping my ass. I mean, I felt like the dumbest you-know-what on the planet.
Yeah, he's probably 2 inches from your head, your nose.
No, he didn't get into my space, but he didn't need to. And he was a world-class ass chewer. I mean, he was really good at it. It was excellent. And I'm thinking, man, Second Lieutenant Abrams is not going to make it to first lieutenant. But anyway, hey, guess what? That never happened ever again.
Right.
Ever. So I tell people, hey, what's one of your secrets to success? I'll be the first one to say I made plenty of mistakes at every level. I'm far from perfect or anything else. I never made the same mistake twice. I could go on and on about my first 3 years in the Army and that cavalry squadron, but I learned so much, and I had leaders who were invested in me. And, at the next level of command, the lieutenant colonel in command of the cavalry squadron, I had one guy I had for a year. In that year time, I saw him exactly 3 times in my lieutenants. In a year in the squadron when he was in command, I saw this guy 3 times.
Wow.
He was terrible, completely insular. We never saw him or heard from him. The next guy came in. We saw him all the time. And he was a big believer in, hey, we're going to work hard, but we're going to play hard. And he's a legend in my community. But there were some times where he sort of crossed the moral, ethical lines that in today's world would have never. This was back in the Army of the 80s. Things were a little different in terms of what was acceptable behavior and what was not. But man, that guy could fight. He was awarded from his service in Vietnam as a young captain. He had been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, which is the second highest award for valor. I mean, the guy he's an unbelievable, he's a true warrior, right? Break glass in time of war kind of guy. Learned a lot from him. And then I left there, went to the Captain's Career Course, and then my next 5 years I spent at Fort Hood, Texas, which is now known as Fort Cavazos, in an armor battalion. I was there almost 5 years to include deploying for Operation Desert Shield and then Desert Storm. There's no substitute for that level of tactical experience, right? I was a battalion maintenance officer for almost 2 years, which has served me well the rest of my career, by the way, because I learned so much about sustainment and logistics. I was part of the sustainment enterprise. That experience I used at every echelon until I retired. It left such a mark on me professionally. And then, commanding for almost 33 months, right? So, a tank company and then a headquarters and headquarters company, which, a headquarters and headquarters company back then was 325 soldiers. People say, well, what are you proud of? And I said, well, I tell you what, I deployed 325 soldiers to Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and I brought all 325 home.
Wow.
That was a big deal for me.
Yeah.
And a big deal for all of us. Everybody say, oh, that was a short war. It didn't seem short because I got there about the middle of September.
Right.
They plopped us in the middle of the Saudi Arabian desert for about 5 months before anything started.
Right.
And when I say the middle of the desert, we were 20 kilometers from the nearest highway, and there was no base. There was no nothing. It was the vehicles we had and our equipment. We had to truck in water. We didn't have our first hot meal probably for about 10 days until we could get the rations necessary and we set up our field kitchens and, prepared food, and it was still raging hot back then. We didn't have any shade. Camouflage nets, that was our shade.
Wow.
We didn't see ice for about, 2.5 months.
Jeez. Wow.
You talk about austere conditions. It was pretty austere. I left there. I was an instructor, left there, went to be an instructor at Fort Knox to train new lieutenants. That was my job. And did that for a couple of years. I met my wife, got married, which was awesome. And then went to Command General Staff College and then I served on. I mean, it would take a long time to go over the 39 years, but I think the most important thing I'd say for your listeners is I spent, aside from 2 years in the Pentagon as a senior major, brand new lieutenant colonel, working on the Joint Staff, I spent the first, I don't know, 21 years of my career in tactical units, division and below. Muddy boots, that's what we did. Training, preparing, deploying, fighting. That's what I did for my first 21 years in the Army.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Exec HQ, a C-suite fractional firm providing elite executives for your business. If you're having challenges taking your business to the next level, if you want to augment your leadership team, or prepare your company for increased growth, profitability, and an eventual successful exit, we have seasoned executives from every C-suite position ensuring a perfect fit for your needs and the dynamics of your industry. You will work with senior leaders who like to roll up their sleeves while checking their egos at the door. They can help your business in specific services such as strategic planning, executive leadership coaching, financial management, corporate governance, marketing, sales management, and many other advisory solutions vital to your business success. That's exechq.com. To learn more, go to exechq.com or email Jeff Palacio at jeff.palacio@exechq.com.
Yeah, I was going to mention that because when you booked the podcast interview, made a note about you were a muddy boots leader. So I actually Googled it, and there's a book about it. But it's basically leading from the front, and getting you're there versus the leading from the back, which is not a good and somebody from a corporate perspective, somebody said it's like leading by walking around, getting to know people and getting in the front lines. But I'd love your definition of it.
Yeah, well, first off, I would align myself with all those two precepts that you just preached a little bit, lead by example and leading by walking around, and I'm happy to talk about that. But for us, muddy boots is a term that we apply to those who spend time in tactical units, who spend a lot of time in the field training, hence the muddy, truly, they're literally and figuratively muddy boots, who spend a lot of time in motor pools, fixing vehicles, supervising the repair of vehicles, preparing vehicles, spending a lot of time in the field for maneuver training, gunnery training, and if not training your own unit, helping train other units as an observer, controller, trainer. Whenever we train, we like to have external evaluators, people to come in and provide that outside set of eyes to help improve the unit's performance. That happens in tactical units, division and below. That's how I spent from 82 to 2005. That's how I spent my time, except for 2 years in the Pentagon working on the Joint Staff.
Wow.
So it lends itself to what, corporate America, what I spent a lot of time on the shop floor.
Yeah.
I might have been in charge of and commanding, at battalion level, about 650, 700 soldiers, or at brigade level, about 4,000 soldiers. It's not like I was sitting in a C-suite corporate headquarters and never left my office.
Right.
I'm an out of the office kind of guy. Wherever they are, that's where I'm going. When you talk to a soldier and you say, hey, he's a muddy boots guy. So what else could I have done? I could have spent multiple tours in the Pentagon. I could have gone and taught at West Point. I could have gone and trained ROTC cadets. There's plenty of high-level staffs, 4-star level headquarters staffs and so forth that are not really muddy boots.
Right.
I do have a couple of master's degrees. One of them I did in conjunction when I was at the Staff College. I got a master's of science in administration from Central Michigan University, and I did that every other weekend, Friday night, all day Saturday, in conjunction with going to the Staff College. I did them simultaneous.
Wow.
Some people, and I don't begrudge them, I made a personal choice. You can go take a 2-year sabbatical and go get a master's degree somewhere and then spend another couple of years utilizing the skills that the Army paid for to do that. That is fully And there's plenty of people who have done that. That was not my path. I wanted to spend my time in units.
Right.
That sort of shaped a lot of my perspective and a lot of my, leadership lessons. I think that's where the real leadership skills are honed, sharpened.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of it is that, and this is where there's a divergence between leadership inside the DoD and corporate world, is we actually have a real world mission where we actually have to be technically and tactically competent. People's lives actually depend on that competency, not from a occupational safety hazards perspective. I'm talking about life and death decisions, employment decisions, right? Putting people in harm's way, devising the plans, devising force protection measures to try to bring as much of the force home as possible. But the competence in warfighting, that's a real skill set. We have doctrine that guides us, right? Books, but it's the application of that doctrine on how to fight against a living, breathing, thinking, uncooperative enemy.
Right.
And people, like I said, people's lives depend on it. I put that in terms of my responsibilities. That's a sacred responsibility for Army leaders, in my opinion. You better be worthy of those soldiers following you, but it's not just your character that matters, although that's critically important, but you actually have to be competent.
Yeah, I like I said, I've interviewed multiple officers and in the different service branches, but yeah, I mean, I just say that to my teams in various companies I work at. Like, we're not saving any lives here, and it's life's at stake. But yeah, why do you think? I mean, you call it a sacred responsibility, but why do you think the Army is just so good in terms of leadership development?
We actually have leadership doctrine. For your listeners, they're like, doctrine? Is that like a cookbook? Is that like a recipe book? Is it dogma? Is it a how-to manual? Is it what exactly is doctrine? So doctrine are the Army's agreed upon and approved written principles. We have doctrine for leadership. We have doctrine for offensive operations, defensive operations, full spectrum operations. We have doctrine for many different disciplines within the Army. But first and foremost, we have really good leadership doctrine. I think it's actually available open source. It's FM 6-20 leadership. It's actually really good, and it gets updated frequently.
Yeah.
It's actually really well written. So that's one. Two, we have and this has been in existence as long as I was in the Army. We actually have, as part of that doctrine, we've established 3 leader development domains. We have the self-development and individual domain. We have the institutional domain, and we have the operational domain. And those 3 legs of the stool all have a role to play. So individual self-development, we have a whole laundry list of things you can do to develop yourself, from, reading programs, online courses, etc. You have an individual responsibility for leader development. Institutional, we send you to school, or again, online courses that are prerequisites to go to in-residence schools. But every school we have in-house, regardless of what it is, has a leader development component. And then third is the operational domain. There's actually an internal argument inside the Army that comes up every now and then as to which domain is most important. Well, if you serve in the schoolhouse in Training and Doctrine Command, and I have 2 tours in Training and Doctrine Command, I was an instructor. Training and Doctrine Command thinks the most important leader development happens in the schoolhouse, right? Where they're learning principles. They're learning the next level of leadership, skills, knowledge, and attributes associated with a certain pay grade, right? Or leadership level. That's their opinion. Again, in my experience, I think an individual, a lot of people say, no, this is on the individual. I don't subscribe to that. I think it takes all 3. But for me, my experience says that the operational domain inside operational units is where the best leader development happens. Because every commander in the operational Army platoons, companies, battalions, brigades, divisions, corps, theaters. They have a specific responsibility, a command responsibility that's stipulated in policy that they must have a leader development program for their subordinates. And the beauty of that mandate is the commander can shape that leader development program any way they want. Some have a very formal approach. We're going to read a book a quarter, and then we're going to meet and we're going to discuss leadership principles, lessons learned, et cetera, et cetera. There's a variety of ways. And I've seen all kinds, and then I developed sort of my own way. So when we talk about ends, ways, and means, I developed my own way on how I thought it was best to develop leaders. And that's why I think the Army is so good at developing leaders, because it's formalized.
Yeah. I just interviewed somebody, they called themselves a leadership junkie, and I would put myself in that category. Did you have aspirations, Abe? Like corporate America, people say, I want to be the CEO of a company or whatever. But did you have aspirations that, kind of climb the Army ladder of command and be a 4-star general?
No, I wanted to be a battalion commander. I wanted to command a tank battalion or a cavalry squadron, either one. Right. At the lieutenant colonel level. So, somewhere between 650 and 800 soldiers. That's what I wanted to do. And I was, lucky. I got selected and I went and did it. And, the division commander, the 2-star general in charge of the division, I worked for 2 different ones. But the primary guy, said, hey, you're the best battalion commander in the division. That wasn't my goal. My goal was we were going to have an ass-kicking outfit. We were going to be a unit that could maintain its equipment, that could outfight anyone, and we were going to be fit. Those were sort of the 3 priorities. Everything else would take care of itself. Because my experience, by the way, from Desert Shield, Desert Storm, was all 3 of those areas for units that were lacking in those 3 areas, they suffered casualties. Because they were either out of shape, they couldn't fight or didn't know how to fight, and they couldn't take care of their equipment. And I said, when I'm in charge, we're not going to do that. We're not going to be that way. Then I got selected early. Then he made me the chief operations officer for the division, the G3, for a 20,000 man division. Then I got selected early for colonel. I went right back to Fort Hood and commanded a brigade combat team. And, then just by sheer timing or whatever, I got sent to Iraq in 2004. Commanded 1st Brigade, 1st Cavalry Division. From that, at that point, at the colonel level, doesn't really matter what you might want to do. It's what the senior leaders of the Army, do they think you have the potential to contribute at the next level? You can't pre-cook it. You can't advocate for yourself. There's no way to influence the outcome of who gets selected for brigadier general or not. It's the senior leaders. They actually decide. There's a very formal board process. It's not perfect. We don't have 100% success rate, but it's pretty doggone good because we have generals who fail. We have generals who fall down. We have generals who, unfortunately, lose their moral compass or whatever, make bad decisions. It does happen, but it's a pretty effective system.
Right.
But no, to answer your question, that was not my plan.
Yeah.
No one was more surprised than me that I got selected for general.
What would you say what does the average citizen, I'll say U.S. citizen, doesn't really understand about what, when you're actually in a war, if you can kind of help them understand what it is actually like to be, at risk of losing not only your life, but, the people in your charge.
We educate for certainty in our military school systems, and we train for uncertainty. So our training, at home station, at every level, and really sort of culminates, we have a combat training centers. We have 2 combat training centers here in the United States, one in Fort Irwin, California at the National Training Center, and one at the Joint Readiness Training Center, Fort Polk, which is now Fort Johnson, Louisiana. Armored brigade combat teams, heavy forces train at Fort Irwin, California, and the Mojave infantry brigade combat teams train down at Fort Polk, Fort Johnson. But we train for uncertainty. So we spend a lifetime training in all kinds of scenarios, ambiguity, uncertainty, and always against a world-class opposing force that is really, really good, right? They have the home field advantage and they're really good. So it's very rigorous. We call the Blue Force units, right? The training unit, they rarely win a battle at our training centers. And I'm getting to answer your question. So we're conditioned on how to fight. We know what it takes. So when you finally get to the show, now you're in combat, even though you'd have trained your whole life, or even if you've only been in the Army for a year, any training you've been through has been with a certain amount of uncertainty. I think the first thing is you come in there with a certain amount of confidence in yourself and your buddies, your teammates, but the uncertainty, the ambiguity, the not knowing exactly what to expect can be daunting. Until you're shot at for the first time, you actually don't know what it's like.
Right.
Or to have your vehicle blown up, or to have incoming indirect fire, rockets, mortars. If you have not had it happen to you, until it happens, there's this overwhelming sense of uncertainty about, what's it going to be like and how am I going to react? And that's why we spend so much time training, because we want them conditioned for that so their reaction will be appropriate to whatever happens. That's why we got to train so hard, so that the response is on autopilot.
Yeah.
Secondly, I'd say is anybody who tells you that that there's not a certain level of fear that something bad's going to happen to them, I'd say they're not being completely honest. Everybody has that concern. 2:00 in the morning, dark road, situation unknown, improvised explosive devices, potential ambushes. You're tense, right? And even the most hardened guys, it's just very tense.
Yeah.
You develop, I think the last thing I'd say is you develop to survive and to thrive, survive and thrive. You develop a hypervigilance. You are switched on all the time. Mm-hmm. That's why most guys have sleeping disorders, et cetera, et cetera. And then when they come back to the States, there's a period of transition to be able to reintegrate back into your family or back into society. And a lot of it has to do with just coming off of this sense of hypervigilance. This is what my experience was.
Sure.
To thrive, we have to conduct operations. You got to conduct offensive operations. It's a high tempo. It's dangerous. But if you're switched on and you're doing all the little things and the big things correctly, and you're, heads on a swivel, following all the proper procedures, never taking any shortcuts, you have to be switched on all the time. And that's what it's like. Getting shot at for the first time or getting blown up for the first time is, I'll be honest with you, it's indescribable. I thought I was prepared for it until the first time it happened. And then I'm like, no, that's what it's like.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Yeah, so you talked a little bit about kind of your transition, but so it's interesting, so 39 years in the Army, you retired, I think, sometime summer of 2021. So your whole life has been scheduled, basically, right? Meetings. So what was that transition like? Okay, now I'm free to do anything I want, or I don't know. What was your plan? Did you have one? Talk about the kind of the next day after you retired. And maybe the year after that. I mean, what was it like for you?
Yeah, well, no, thanks for asking, because everybody does it a little differently. And what happened with me is not what everybody expected. My last 6 years in the Army, 6+ years, I was a 4-star general commanding very large organizations with a lot of demands on my time. Every minute of every day scheduled, is crazy, right? And a small team to help manage me to make sure I got from A to B to C to D, that I had, I was properly prepared, read aheads, people taking stuff from my hands, putting stuff in my hands, hey, General, go stand over there. Sir, in 5 minutes, you're going to walk into that room. You're going to pin this medal. Here are your remarks. That sort of a tempo. Okay. So most people thought that I was going to have a huge crash, right? That I was going to, I was have withdrawal symptoms, and that I was going to drive myself crazy, that I was going to drive my wife crazy, on and on and on. I had a different plan. So the first one was, all the services do this, right? We have a transition program, right? Whether you're enlisted officer, even general officers, we have a general officer transition course. It's a week long. I was the very first Army 4-star to go to the week-long GO transition course. Most 4-stars, up to that point, no other 4-star had bothered to take a week off, go to this course with their wife. I did. And I learned a lot about all the do's and don'ts about this exact thing you're talking about, the mindset change. So I literally ran through the tape, to use a sprinter's analogy. I sprinted through the tape. I changed command on the 2nd of July. I got on an airplane that day with my wife. We flew back because of the time zone change. We arrived in North Carolina late at night, 10 o'clock at night. My truck was in storage. I had a buddy of mine pull it out of storage. My truck was there. My buddy was there. I got my truck. I drove 2.5 hours to our house on the North Carolina shore. I woke up on the 3rd of July and on the beach, 73 yards from the beach. It was a beautiful hot summer day. And man, it was like I was breathing again. And I had no problem, Jeff. I had no problem sleeping in. If you run through the tape, you've given it your all, you've accomplished what you can, you're satisfied, and you have no gas left in the tank.
Right.
I don't think there's a problem making the transition. Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, I've embraced the idea that I'm in control of what I do and what I don't do. And it's been liberating. That's how it's been for me.
So I have to ask you, when you landed in North Carolina and your buddy was there with your truck, was that the first time you drove in like 6 years? Because you probably had a driver prior.
Well, no. When I was in at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, I drove a lot.
Oh, okay.
But 3 years in Korea, I'll bet I drove. I was not allowed to drive off the base. And I'll bet in 3 years I got behind the wheel 6 times.
Wow.
To go to the shopette.
Yeah.
Right. To go get gas for my wife's car.
Yeah.
But you're right. So it was a little odd getting in the truck and driving down to the beach, but it was good.
Yeah. So wait, so you transitioned out, broke through the tape, you left it all on the field, so you felt good, right? I mean, you had nothing else to give, moved on. So how did you decide what to do next? Because I know you're serving on the board of Vistage Worldwide. You're on the advisory board of Via Space. They're doing some hybrid engine technology there. And I know you do consulting and public speaking, but was that a plan, or you developed that starting July 3rd?
My plan was, first off, right, when you retire from the military, maybe from any job, but when you retire, you have 3 things that need to shape, kind of how things are going to work. One is, where are you going to live? Second, how much money do you need to make or want to make? And third, what do you want to do? Those 3 things have to be, you got to figure out how to put those in balance. For us, figuring out where we were going to live was most important. And we chose to move to the Midwest so we could be within driving distance of our children and the grandchildren. So by process of elimination, that took some opportunities that I might have considered doing off the plate. A lot of guys in my position, they kind of retire in the DC area, Washington, DC metro area. I'll never live there again, ever. No way. In fact, I'm on record as saying nobody could offer me enough money to go live in DC, to do anything. I made a commitment. The second thing was I did not want to work full time. I don't need to financially. We're okay. I'd like to make some for other reasons. We're fine financially. So I didn't need to go find a full-time job, and I didn't. So I don't have a financial need. And then, so third, it was on what do I want to do, balanced with my desire to have time for myself to enjoy retirement, to enjoy things that my wife and I like to do together or individually, right? So we like to travel. We like the arts. We like to see our kids and be part of their lives and the grandkids. I like to hunt. So during the fall and the winter period, that kind of shapes it. My wife and I both golf together. So I want to have time to do that. That's what kind of got me in those areas. So I wanted to make a contribution in corporate America through board work. So balance of nonprofit and for-profit. Consulting, right? That's how I got on as a senior advisor to BioSpace. I got recruited by them, by the previous CEO who was looking for some help. That is basically word of mouth. People looking for consulting work on either strategic management or strategic planning or leadership. Those are the principal things that I get called on for consulting. And it's fun. I'll be honest with you, it's been word of mouth. That's kind of how it's settled in. I've had to say no. It's not in our DNA to say no, but I have a limit because I've got to keep those things in balance with. I like to have discretionary time on my own. I schedule my day.
Right. Yeah, I love that advice. And like you said, I think it applies for anyone, after leaving, whether it's the services or, corporate America. So it's great advice. So, Abe, I'd like to ask my guests that are great leaders to help people that, early 20-year-old that graduates college and now they're starting a career journey. What advice do you have for them as they kind of enter the professional world?
You need to be a leader of the strongest character. Character matters. Don't believe that it doesn't. Are there some companies where character is not valued? I'm sure there are, but not if you want to be successful. Your character, the strength of your character, and the values that you bring to the table, and I put at the top of that list integrity being at the top of your values list, but the strength of your character, that is what matters, because that's the moral and ethical foundation of young leader behavior. And there'll be so many temptations that will challenge and you'll question and you'll be tested, but it's the strength of your character. Okay. So be a leader of the strongest character. Second, I'd say is know your job, right? And that sounds pretty trite, but here's when I say know your job, I mean mastery level your job, mastery. Think of a virtuoso violinist, a master of the violin. How many hours a day do you think they practice?
8, 10,
Lots,
12.
Right?
Yeah.
I used to tell that to young leaders. I said, hey, I expect you to know your job, the mastery level. When I talk to groups, I love telling this. I'd ask them, I say, hey, indulge me, close your eyes. The person who you love the most in the world has been in a horrific car accident and has a traumatic, significant brain injury. Who do you want working on your loved one? Do you want A, someone who went to a top-level medical school, got straight A's, interned at a top-flight surgical internship, transitioned into the neurosurgery residency, has published several articles in the New England School of Med School Journal, is well respected by their colleagues. The operating staff loves them. Do you want that person, A, or do you want B, someone who went to a third-rate medical school, got all C's, had difficulty finding an internship, barely scraped by on their residency, and everybody in the hospital hates them, has never published a thing? Who do you want working on your loved one? A. Okay. In the corporate world, it's not life or death, but that's what your bosses want, and that's what your people want. They want to look up to you. They want to respect you. They want you to be A. They're cheering for you to be A. They're expecting you to be A. And by the way, the companies, for profit, they're counting on you to be A so that they can increase their earnings. So know your job.
Right.
And then the last thing I tell youngsters is, hey, if you want to be a leader in corporate America, you need to figure out real fast how to take care of people. People are the special sauce. The way to do it is to take care of people. Think about taking care of people one at a time, which means you have to get to know them. You have to figure out what makes them tick. You have to understand, what their family situation is, what their, stressors are, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, how to communicate with them, how to inspire them, how to motivate them, how to correct them, how to discipline them. You have to make an investment in your people. But if you'll take care of them, right, by giving them, a great place to work in where everyone is respected, regardless of race, creed, color, gender orientation, where high standards are expected, right, where people, operate at the highest integrity, right, where there's a deep level of trust, that happens by taking care of people. That's the key to young leaders.
Yeah, I love that. And for all you introverts out there that are listening, see, Abe could do it as an introvert and lead almost 1 million people. So can you. So there you go.
You gotta, yeah. But I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm terrible at cocktail parties.
Yeah, I understand. I understand. Yeah, well, Abe, thank you so much. Again, honored to have you on. I so enjoyed it, and I can't wait to meet you in person at some point. So thanks for coming on the Corporate Couch today.
Hey, Jeff, really appreciate the opportunity. And, I also look forward to us linking up together, and maybe we can some sort of future collaboration, but thanks for having me.
Yeah, that'd be great. All right, have a great rest of the day. I could listen to that episode multiple times, which I have. I mean, just incredible. Dad was a, 4-star general also. A tank's named after him. He didn't decide to go in the military till he was 17 after his older brother.
All of his brothers. He had one brother.
Yeah, 2 brothers are both in the military. But his middle brother, so the one closest in age to him, being a brother, was 14 years his senior. And didn't think he was tough enough to be in the Army. And then he, put him to work on a tank platoon. So he's getting up at the crack of dawn and working till like 7, 8 o'clock. And he said, I love this shit, basically. And he goes, I want to be in the Army. I love the leadership. I love the mission. I love what we're trying to do for our country. I mean, the guy was just, 39 years in the Army, 4-star general. His father was a 4-star general. At one point he led almost 1 million people, almost 800,000 soldiers and 96,000 civilians.
That's a big hierarchy.
That's a big
chart.
corporation. and he was just humble. Like he said when he first started, they were, somewhere in, Germany in the Cold War, so this is like the early 80s. He got there, he didn't even, he was in charge of something, made a mistake the first time he did it, but they gave him grace because it was the first time. Well, the next day, when he made the mistake, his troop commander, he called his troop commander a world-class ass chewer.
Yep.
And the
One
guy
of the best.
just lit into him. But, I don't know. I could just go on and on. He was humble. He made mistakes. And what I really love, and this is a lot of guests I think we have, so you're, we didn't get to the percentage of what percent of somebody that goes to West Point and serves in the military, in the Army, becomes a 4-star general, but it's low, whatever it is. And I said, did you have aspirations to be a 4-star general like your dad, right? And he just said, no, I want to be a battalion or cavalry commander.
He wanted to essentially be middle management.
Yeah, well, yeah, and he loved being in the field, tactical, like, the muddy boots leadership. So I don't know. You and I can have this conversation and make it a whole nother episode. But what was your takeaway?
It could go on and on and on. He was. You talk about him being humble. He's the kind of guy that you think you could bump into in the grocery store, and he would just be a regular guy, and you could have a discussion with him about sports or something like that. When in fact he's got all of this history, behind him. That's amazing stuff. He's one of the few people that we've had on the show that has his own Wikipedia page, Not only does he have a Wikipedia page, his dad has a Wikipedia page, and I don't think that's ever happened. And I'm pretty sure that we haven't had anybody on the show yet where his dad has had an Army tank named after him. I think that he's probably the
M1 Abrams, unbelievable.
M1 Abrams tank. So I think he's the first guest on the corporate couch that has had an Army tank named after his dad.
Right.
And, not only his brothers, all the women in his family all have military connections too. They
married Army officers.
They all married Army officers.
All three daughters, three daughters, three sisters.
Or some of them, I can't remember exactly what, that they're the daughters of Army officers. So it was an amazing interview. About towards the end of it, he mentioned one thing where he said, and I wrote this quote down, I want to make sure I get this right. We educate for certainty, but we train for uncertainty. And I think that's an amazing quote. A lot of times when you think of law enforcement or military or even athletes sometime where they get into a tense situation and they say that my training kicked in. In other words, they don't have time to think about how to react. They don't have time to think about what the proper reaction would be. They just have to go with their gut. My training kicks in. We train for uncertainty. And I think that's a great lesson in life, maybe even in business, that that's the kind of training that you need to do. You need to train more for your uncertainty than you do for your certainty.
Right.
So that I remember when I was even writing code, and I've even given this advice to my son who's now writing code, much like I did, that 2/3 of the code that I write is handling situations that should never happen. Like you're testing to make sure that a zip code is valid, or that a proper code has been entered, or that the name is spelled correctly, or something like that. You train for this uncertainty. You plan on that happening, and you anticipate that happening, hoping that it never does. Amazing interview. We could go on all day.
Yeah, and the other thing, which I'm surprised you didn't mention, is for all you introverts out there, you can run a company of almost 1 million employees. He's that was how we started the interview.
He's an ISTJ, a card-carrying, proud ISTJ.
Just like you.
I love it. Thanks for
introvert. So yeah, that was amazing, and that was the first question I asked him. So that was phenomenal. But
let me tell you, I'm a proud ISTA.
That's right.
It's wonderful.
I love it. So, Joe, what great leadership advice after Abe's conversation and insight would you want to?
We are going to go to that great philosopher named George Brett, who is a legendary infielder and designated hitter for the Kansas City Royals.
Yeah.
And one of the times at the beginning of a season, he said this: even if the Royals only win 6 games all year, even if they go 6-156, I hope they beat the Yankees 6 times.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.